Hello, thanks for joining us today. Here is a gentleman who fully qualifies for the term legend or legendary. Now mind you, Bob Trendler, who we lost last year, July 18th of 2011, started on the air at the age of 11 in 1923. Do the math. When we lost Bob last year, he was 99 years old, just a few weeks short of the century mark. Bob was a composer, an orchestra conductor, a thinker. He created the Chicago Theater of the Air. As a child back in the 30s and 40s, when we should have been asleep, my brother and I would turn on our little 5-tube superheterodyne radio, or whatever they called them then, to listen to the Chicago Theater of the Air, rebroadcasting the great operettas and operas of our time. And for a couple of young kids, as my brother and I were then, it gave us a taste of culture that I would like to think I have never gotten over and still have a great appetite for. But Bob was a pioneer in every sense of the word. And I'm not going to do the bio here. That's what we did with Bob back in July of 2003. Here he is, one of the great pioneers, Bob Trendler.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Broadcast Biographies. I'm your host, Don Blair. Let me just take a moment before introducing our guest for this program, just to bring you up to speed on what we are trying to do here. Broadcast Pioneers, the Sarasota, Florida chapter, is a group of people who have literally spent their lives in radio and or television, almost all of whom, including myself, are retired and enjoying the life that you live in Florida. We started out with Rosa Rio because she was the organ sound of radio in the 30s, 40s, and right into the mid-50s. We then went to program 2 with John Gambling, who with his father and then followed by his son, created a 75-year dynasty on WOR in New York. We're talking legendary people. We dropped down a notch when we did my bio for the third show because I had a lot of nice pictures of the space program, and we hope you enjoyed it. It was rather a good visual show, I thought. And I've spent almost a half a century myself doing radio and TV. But today, I would say this is a broadcast pioneer, ladies and gentlemen, because when I was 10 years old, our guest, Bob Trendler, had been in the business for 10 years. Take it from there. Bob, welcome to Broadcast Biographies.
Thank you very much.
And we have talked on the phone. We have lunched over the years that I've been down in Florida and you've been here. And you just told me the other day, and this just knocked me off my feet, you got your first job in radio in 1923, Robert?
Yes, I was 11 years old, and I had to have a clout, you know. So I had a mother who was just a pretty good singer.
I guess.
A recitalist and did some opera. And when she found out that I could play...
Piano?
Yes. She hit me a few times until I got to be a good player.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to work on WLW, and she naturally sang, and she instituted a thing called Mother and Son programs. Did them all over. In fact, when I got out of the 8th grade, she said, let's go to Europe. So we got the Lady Returns, and she grabbed me all over Europe doing these things. And
isn't that funny? That's a fascinating, wonderful way for a young man to grow up.
But yes, but he likes to play baseball.
You weren't that thrilled about it.
No, I hated it.
Did you?
But I was at the conservatory, college conservatory in Cincinnati, 4 days a week, reluctantly.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's where you were born and brought up, Cincinnati?
Yes, and I guess I became a good player, but I was a classical player, and I was a little sick and tired of that. So when I was 18 years old, I said, I'm going to split from here, and I'm going to New York, and I'm going to become a jazz player.
You went out on your own?
Oh, I went by myself.
Okay.
I knew an act. I knew an act, and I went to New York with them, and they naturally got me an agent right away, which was good. And unfortunately, my first job, I got it in 3 hours, and I was playing classical music again. I said, oh, come on. But I learned, and I was with the great ones, the Vincent Youmans and
Yeah.
and the Gershwins and
Right.
and all the good ones, because there's a place called the Brill Building, which is a nest
On
in
Broadway
New
in New
York.
York.
You know, and everybody is there.
Yeah.
And everybody, Irving Berlin and everybody, and I gradually learned.
Yeah,
so you take it from there.
That's the music composers and publishers
They're
heaven.
all there.
Yeah, yeah, we were talking about it out in the car. That's where Johnny Marks wrote Rudolph the Red-Nosed
yeah.
Reindeer.
Oh, yes, and-
sitting around with not much to do one day.
Well,
but anyway,
yes.
you really cut your teeth at age 11
Yeah.
on WLW in Cincinnati.
That was really a wonderful, wonderful shop, and later became the nation's station.
Yeah.
And Powell Crosley said it's going to be live music, and the salesman worked like he had 75 players there, and every 4 months or 5 months they went to New York and brought in new talent, good talent, and then much of that talent went on to become very, very famous.
Isn't that interesting that even today, as we sit here, the name Powell Crosley is a name to be reckoned with in the Sarasota County area?
Well,
The Crosley estate.
He has the Crosley house here, and
Yeah.
he was quite a diver. And I got kind of a story that wasn't supposed to be included. They hired a man that I knew in New York by the name of Fats Waller.
Oh,
Real.
we've heard of Fats Waller.
Well,
yeah.
and he was a friend, and they had a show, a midnight show, and I'm trying to think the name of it, but we players would catch it once in a while on organ. And this particular time, I had it there, and Fats Waller had a date, and he came up, and they had a man by the name of Peter something, the head announcer, who would inquire around the world, are you getting us? And then the studio would go dead, and he would be in a little booth in there. And I said to Fats, I said, why don't you try this big Wurlitzer? It's great. He said, yeah, man. So he starts swinging, la-ba-da-ba-da-ba. He's going like that. The door opened. Powell Crosley walked in. He said, this is a sacred instrument. You're fired.
He fired Fats Waller?
That's all.
And not too many people can
Well,
make that claim
I shouldn't
to
have
fame.
told that story, but that's true.
Well, hey, that's what we want to hear. You've had an incredible career. How do we categorize Bob Trendler? Composer, conductor, arranger, all of the same.
You have to start, luckily, I was what you'd call a good pianist. Now, all the symphony conductors around the world are basically, like Barenbaum, the new guy up in Chicago, he's a wonderful player. Schulte, it's a wonderful player, most of them. And the studio musicians had to be better than anybody else because they had to play everything.
Well, here's Bob. You just saw up on the screen. We saw you at a keyboard.
Oh, really?
Rehearsing. What was it?
I think, was I still smoking?
No, this was that little column that we brought from your home this morning about one of the busiest men in music, and those were the WGN Chicago days.
Yes, and at that time also, they had decided that the public would like to look at radio programs. So WGN built a theater, beautiful building right next to the tribute building, but very inefficient. But no backstage. Behind the backstage there were offices and so forth. So I came into the picture to prepare these various shows. And basically you start. How do you start? I started out as a pianist. I was a sideman playing, but I was an arranger, and that helps.
Yes.
And then
And also
you get to a point,
composed.
well, you become a composer.
Yeah.
And some years later, I had 5 different dramatic shows, and you score and you cheat from yourself a little bit, and you take something from here.
Well, that's
you
what we're
take-
trying. That's the
or
picture. No, that's
later.
okay. No, I'm glad you mentioned the 5 because the genesis, the whole idea of this program with you today is we've been talking New York on this series up to now.
Yes.
And
Oh, I see.
don't intend to overlook
Okay.
the fact that Chicago was a powerhouse in broadcasting.
It certainly was. In the very beginning, they had a lot of little 15-minute shows. Now, I recall, I mentioned to you, I had 5 little 15-minute shows before noon.
Yeah.
3 at CBS and 2 across the street at WGN. I mean, one you play the piano, another I was with a poet, and another guy I was with my fat tenor, and so forth.
Yeah.
That's the way it went. And they paid well. And so anyway, the soap operas were ramping up. For instance, the Jordans, they became the Fibber McGee and Molly.
Yeah,
well, they
sure.
were very, very, very dear friends. We
Yes.
coffeed. They sat around NBC, and they all worked. And I was doing a thing there right in the beginning called Mare Oil Shampoo, and anyway, you were in the midst of it. Don Amici and myself and a couple of the guys. We formed a thing called the Actors Club, which is a nice place to eat and,
Yeah.
and tell lies. You know?
Did we show that music sheet yet in the show, that full picture of you back in the, 50, 60 years ago? A photograph of Bob on a. I think we've already gone well past that.
Well,
But it was
that's
just
when
kind of a cute contrast.
Well, I had a little hair, but you remember when television came in, we came in, I'm jumping way ahead,
Yeah.
in 1947, and I looked at myself at the monitor. In my white tails, I looked like an albatross. I was the ugliest thing you ever saw in your life, and I said, I got to do something. So I went to the doctor, lost 50 pounds,
Really?
and I said, I got to get a hairpiece.
I see.
Now, you know, you have to put those on with spirit gum, you know.
We don't worry about hair pieces today, do we?
No, but I tell you, my head was
There he
always
is, there he
red and
is,
was
yeah.
just awful. But anyway,
There we have you up on the screen now.
that was my own hair.
That's the
But you see,
Trendler of the early 40s.
But
We figure-
you notice it was going.
Yeah. We figure that must be about 1941. So what's it, 62 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Listen, I want to transport you to something which hit my life when I was a kid, listening to radio, probably later at night than my brother and I were supposed to. You said
Understood.
Chicago Theater of the Air.
9 to 10 on Saturday night.
Ladies and gentlemen, back in the late 30s and through the 40s, the war years,
15 years.
on GN in Chicago. And we probably didn't even realize we were listening to GN in Chicago. We may even have heard it through OR in New
They
York.
had 300-odd stations.
Okay, so we're listening to a New York station, and we're getting culture, my brother and I,
Yeah.
listening to this fabulous, organization
Yeah.
of singers and musicians
And actors.
and actors,
Double cast, you know.
fronted by the legendary Robert R. McCormick, the owner-publisher of the Chicago. Was it-
He owned it.
He owned the newspaper,
He owned the
and
world.
he had to give you his little sermon at the top, and you had to buy into that before you could get to the opera.
Usually. Sometimes he tried to hide it because
I know.
many people might put it in the middle of the show.
Well, we have a friend in Broadcast Pioneers who was managing a station in New Orleans at the time,
Right.
and he said they used to block the colonel right off the air.
That's a terrible thing. Shouldn't say that. Shouldn't say that.
But tell me about Chicago Theater of the
I
Air,
shall.
because people listening today, to whom radio is just a thing
Yes.
while they're driving in the car, have no idea
Okay.
of what today would be like Toscanini and the NBC Symphony in Studio 8H. Do you remember how many people were in this?
I can give you the whole routine. Usually used about 35 men in the orchestra, and I used a little outfit, 14 voices, and the soloists. We usually try to get someone from the Lyric Opera or the Met. And we used to, Richard Tucker, for instance, came in about once a month and,
Yes.
and so forth. But
You ever have Lawrence Melchior or anything like that?
no, you couldn't get him.
Couldn't get him, huh?
No,
Okay.
no.
Well, Richard Tucker wasn't chopped liver.
Oh no, we got real good Jepson
Yeah.
and all kinds of people. But basically, when Petrillo decided,
Oh, yeah.
this is what you've got to have.
The musicians. Union.
So that meant that you work 5 days a week and you work 5 hours out of 8. That's why they were paid so terribly well.
Yeah.
But a radio station goes 7 days a week, as does a television station 7 days a week. Now what do you do on the other 2 days? So Chicago Theater of the Air took Fridays and Saturdays.
I see.
So you got 5 hours rehearsal on Friday. It's not easy because we crucified these operas.
Yes.
And these operettas, we put them into 50 minutes.
50 minutes.
You can't, well, you saw
Let me
it.
just read a few. Bob gave me this morning as we were heading over here. And this is the seasons and the productions that Chicago Theater put out. I'm only going to read a
105,
few.
105.
But for instance, Brigadoon, Blossom Time, Babes in Toyland, Connecticut Yankee, Chocolate Soldier. These are the greatest operettas. This is Lehar and all these people. Desert Song. Oh, my goodness, my goodness. The Gypsy Princess, The Great
Songs
Waltz.
you never heard of before. We
Song
always
of
did-
Norway, The Student Prince,
Yeah.
Tales of Hoffman, and so on and so on.
We usually did 12 operas a year, and the rest were operettas,
Yeah.
and it was 40 weeks a year, and then the colonel would go away, and we would do summer concerts, which we really liked.
Well, it's only taken me 60 years to catch up to you, and thank you for putting a little culture in my life, okay? Because
But I wanted to come and say another thing. The colonel would not allow a commercial program. I mean, that could not be commercial. It
Really?
had to be sustaining.
Ah.
He would not let anybody pay for it, and it was terribly expensive, and we had to rent all that stuff. It's called grand rights, and that would come from Tams Whitmark or recording, and so you might pay Song of Norway $2,500 just for the rights to do it.
wow.
So it got to be very, very expensive. So, but it was a big thing, and it stopped immediately when the colonel died because it was a big.
When
big
did it stop?
1955.
It went into 1955.
1955.
And we were listening.
That's
as
when
I
he
said,
died.
As kids, we were listening on the radio late at night.
Sure.
Our parents probably didn't even want us listening at that late night,
No.
but we were listening to good music. And it had to be in the immediate post-war years that I first caught on to Chicago theater.
Yeah, well,
So anyway, what did we just have up there on the screen, gentlemen? We had a picture of Robert, did we? Yeah. Oh, this is a show that you had called Top Tunes with Trendler. What was that all about?
this was a show that
That's you at the keyboard.
yeah, it went to California and in various places, and it was just a straight radio show, boy and a girl singer and the orchestra. And after a time, this was now after 47, we began in television in 47. We were doing both,
Both, of course.
and
People hadn't given up on radio quite yet.
oh no,
No.
we were still doing Chicago Theater of the Arts till 55.
Good.
You see.
Good.
And so anyway, they decided that they needed something. They had nothing but an orchestra. So they said, we'll do Top Tunes as a television show.
Was it like the hit parade on television?
We only had two singers.
Yeah, okay.
So it was a half hour.
Right.
So they decided that we would rehearse the radio show, do the radio show, and during the radio show, the director would move the cameras around. And he'd get all the shots done.
I see.
At the end of the thing, we finished the show, and the ID, then we start all over again. We did the same thing all over, and it seemed to catch on, and it won an Emmy.
It won an Emmy.
Well, it was a pretty good show, you know. But we did so many. I gave you a list
Yeah.
that your friend made out of all the shows, and it really is scandalous, you know. And
This
it only
is-
goes to 1949, but
This is amazing, but I was telling Bob about a friend of mine, an engineer that worked at the Mutual Network when I first came to New York, and this young man used to walk up and down Broadway and 7th Avenue and go to the various networks where he used to work or had friends, and he was borrowing all these great old acetates,
Yeah.
these huge discs of the old radio shows.
right, 16-inch.
He completely ignored all the legalities and
that's all
the
wrong.
permission slips and so forth. All he did was go ahead and become a multimillionaire young man with a company called Radio Yesteryear, and then he did Video Yesteryear.
I don't. Where do
this-
you get these things?
this
This is all
list,
on the internet.
We can't show it to you now because it's just, small print page after
These are
page.
all a radio show.
This is your life, Bob Trendler.
I know it, and he doesn't put NBC in there, and he stops in 1949, and the good stuff didn't happen.
Listen to
until-
this from the mid World War II years on. Harmony Hall, August 43, Mutual Network, WGN. Swings the Thing, July 1945. Smoke Ring, September 11th, 49. Top Tunes with Trendler, which we just mentioned. The Avalon Showboat.
Oh, that's NBC.
See?
Oh yeah.
But you were doing it
Oh,
for
sure.
NBC, but you were doing it in Chicago, out of Chicago.
And once in a while, we had to pretend like we were going to a town, like
I see.
Omaha, so or St. Louis or so forth. So the whole gang would go out there. And I'd have to pick up an orchestra out there. And I've got a story that you're aware of, and I'd like to tell it. We came to a place, and Elsie the Cow was on the show.
That was my first job after high school, taking
Now,
care of Elsie.
the show takes 5 minutes of laughs, right? Now, nobody laughed because Elsie the Cow was mooing all during this show. And you come to the end of this thing, which was Showboat, and the Calliope only played in the beginning. Now I've got the finish. Here comes the Showboat. Here comes the show. And we played it for 5 minutes, and the trumpet players' faces were purple, and it got so that they couldn't play anymore, and we didn't know what to do, and they kept yelling, "Go to Black, go to something, go to something."
Yeah.
And Elsie the cow did it, and that was your friend.
That was my friend. I just want a few references here. Look, listen to the names. The Ben Burney Show, 1935.
Yeah, dear
Sponsored
friend.
by Pabst Blue Ribbon
Right.
Beer. But the names, and for some of our veteran viewers will recognize
He was a
these
dear
names. Harlow Wilcox, the announcer.
Sure.
Wasn't he the announcer on Fibber, McGee, and Molly?
Yes.
No, that was...
I
never,
don't
never mind.
Too far back.
Show called Tom, Dick, and Harry. This is all chronicled here. This is incredible. The Human Adventure. These are all shows...
That one got a great notice because it was sponsored by the University of Chicago and the Britannica, and it was put out to be studied by universities.
Well, what this is reference to, and I won't dwell on this
I don't know. Yeah.
But what my friend has done, and this is his stock in trade. He is a collector and seller of old-time radio.
Okay.
And what all of these little references,
I guess
it says, look at audio condition, good, complete. So, in other words, stuff that you might have even thought was gone forever, J. David Golden
There it
has
is.
found and has.
Very strange.
And it's obtainable today, which is kind of nice to think about, because you have such an incredible track record, and it's still out there, Bob.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
okay, so we've gone through. Oh, did you do the Bozo the Clown yet, there, Charles? Have we got Bozo on a
No,
picture? coming up?
we're forgetting one thing though.
What?
We're really forgetting Tom, Dick, and Harry, who were so important in my life.
Really? Tell us about it.
Well, I did all the Brown and Williamson things.
Tobacco.
Yeah, and I did 5 a week for them, and it was probably the high spot of my life because
What was Tom, Dick, and Harry? A
they
musical?
were 3 guys that were terribly funny, and they had fine voices, and they were stars in Chicago before I came. When I came and I got started with my vocal groups, basically that's how I started with singers. And they came to the office. They had lost their pianist. Carl Hofel died, and they came in and they said, "Would you go with us and write for us?" I said, "Sure." They started us on Brown and Williamson down in WLW,
Oh, yeah.
and
Okay.
Red Skelton.
Cincinnati.
Red Skelton was on the show, and they brought all the shows up here, and Red was there the first year, and then he went to California, and
Yeah.
my friend Dave Rose became his conductor.
David Rose.
A good friend.
There's another famous name. I mean, you have just rubbed elbows
Well,
with some wonderful people.
I've got some stories I shouldn't tell here.
Oh, we're
but they
looking
were
at a
so
picture
funny.
now of your first Emmy Award.
Oh.
And in the foreground, to the left, leaning back in his chair, smoking his prototypical cigar, is the great late Danny Thomas.
Yeah.
You were at the lectern facing us, and this was your first Emmy. Do you remember?
Yeah,
And what was it for?
for being a ranger conductor. No, ranger composer. And then next year I got one for ranger composer conductor.
Okay.
And then it's slacking off until this.
You also picked up a few radio awards in your day.
Yeah, yes,
The radio equivalent of the Oscar.
yeah. You got to remember that we were a big shop.
Yes, that's what we're
And
trying
the-
to point out here.
And the colonel said, if the networks can do it, I can do it too, because he dragged along with him all of Mutual. There were hundreds of stations,
That warms my heart. That was my first network
Yes,
job
it
in
just-
New York.
And
There's
though
some
they
of
were
your-
not
Yep.
big like WMAQ, they were stations and had lots and lots. I know that you were with Mutual.
Our viewers now are looking at some of your sheet music, Bob. I don't know how many songs you've written. I think you're a little short of Irving Berlin, but you were a composer.
Well, I've been a member of ASCAP for more years than I want to remember, but really I could never really get involved. I was just too busy.
Too busy.
And this is a terrible thing to say, but I wrote 5 pieces of music to go in the back of my book on a radio show, because rehearsals were tight and time was tight. So if I was rehearsing a show and I'm short, and I had one that went 1.5 minutes, another one went 2 minutes, and so I say, we'll take number 7 and put that in. They were never published, so 3-4 of these things did become published, and I think one of these things.
Those were a few we
yeah.
just showed. Yeah.
And I did all kinds of things. I did polkas and everything.
We're looking at a couple at a microphone, a boom microphone, and you're conducting the orchestra in the background. And this is the music show, is it not? With Mike Douglas?
I think so.
Yeah.
One of them. Remember that was on for 7 years.
7 years. Well, the
This
picture
is just
shows,
a rehearsal.
Huh?
This is just a rehearsal.
I see. But you're standing there, as most conductors do. You're looking at your singers, and young, still to become major talk show television star Mike Douglas is there. As a matter of fact, the picture that we've been kind of looking at throughout this whole show that sits between us is that the music show?
That's at a different time.
Different time, but
Yes.
is it the same show?
Yes. You see, what we did with the music show, we would change, for instance, the set. Basically, the music it was always good music, and there was a law saying that I couldn't do one complete show without permissions, because a dumb law, you could do 2 vocals and instrumentals. So I did composer shows, and the great, the 15 minutes at a crack.
Yeah.
And this thing here was typical. Some years I had a larger choir, and some years I had a different soprano and a different baritone. See the guy over on the left, baritone?
Yeah.
His mother and father were deaf mutes.
Really?
And there's a marvelous, marvelous voice. An opera singer. It was really good.
We're not here to tell tales out of school, but you have said to us in conversation that the great George Gershwin was, I guess the term you might use, difficult, a little tough. But I was going to ask you, what kind of a guy was Mike Douglas to work with when he was starting out in the business?
Mike was wonderful. He came from what was his name? The comedy band that they had a show.
Spike Jones?
No.
Kay Kaiser.
Kay Kaiser.
Really?
Yeah, they were doing a show at WGN.
Yeah.
And it got a commercial. Word ended up, they were at the Black Hawk, and they did various things like that. And Mike was one of the singers, and didn't want to be on the road anymore. And he had a wife and 2 girls, and he just wanted to settle down. And he was with us about 7 years. And then he got he got that talk show, because he was very good. And I did small shows with him. Talent shows and various things. He was very, very good. And then he got that show in Cleveland.
It's very interesting because...
became very rich.
Yes. A lot of people, when they think of Mike Douglas today, their only recollection is that talk show, and probably most of the time from Philadelphia. And the thought of him as a, quote, singer, the same way with a lot of people associate Merv Griffin as a talk show host, and he was a band singer.
Yeah.
With Freddie Martin.
Thing with him in Denver, yeah.
So let's see, where are we on these pictures and everything? Well,
getting older all the time.
Oh boy, oh boy. Listen, you had a long run. Oh, there's I was talking about George Gershwin just a moment ago.
Yep.
And what we're looking at the screen right now, and you can see the year 1960 up in the corner. Robert Trendler to conduct the Chicago Symphony in a complete performance of Gershwin's work. Of course, Gershwin was dead for many, many years by that time.
Died in 1937.
Yeah.
And he was believe me, he was a great, great talent.
Yes.
He was just almost too much. He could do it all. And when he died in 1937, I did dedicatory programs for him. And it was a great loss, and I've done Gershwin for years. This one was a very, very expensive show. I did 3 numbers of his. It cost $2,500 a piece just to do them.
Yeah, you're throwing around some good numbers.
Well, I mean, these publishers wanted that. I did the Rhapsody, and I did the American in Paris, and I did Cuban Overture. They weren't cheap.
Because we have biographed in this series, and will again, people like you and me that have come and gone into the business and out of it and retired from it, child actors, singers on little radio shows, and they start talking about the fees. And this was before AFTRA and Screen Actors got fired up and rolling and started putting in some protections. And a lot of these people were working for very, very menial fees.
Yes.
And yet you're throwing some pretty nice numbers at us.
Well, it was a good shop, and I think by this time there was AFTRA. There was AFTRA first.
AFTRA,
and
before they put the T for television.
Then it became
For those,
and they made they made a good living, the actors. But when all the shows went to California, they all moved there.
American Federation of Radio Artists, later to be television and radio artists, which
you've been
I was
a
a
member
lifetime
forever,
member.
sure.
Because once you got to New York, well, it even started in the suburbs, but once you got to New York, there was no choice.
No choice.
If you didn't join the union,
choice.
you didn't stay in
That's
New
right.
York. So, and I'm sure it was strong in Chicago,
Oh, sure.
because that was the,
They
that
were
was
all
the bastion.
And even my chorus singers think I paid for rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just didn't fool around. That's why I said everything had to go very, very fast, and everything had to be ready.
Yeah.
You know, when you went in.
Mhm.
So it was, you could get the diverticulitis very easily.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
"Ooh," you
Yeah,
know.
nerves and
Yeah.
all the tension and everything else.
Yeah.
So we've already noted that your career started at the ripe old age of 11
Yeah.
in 1923. When did you, quote, hang it up, say, I'm out of this business?
1975.
Wow.
I was 62.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to live on a boat forever, so we had a good-sized boat.
Yeah, what size was that? I saw a
44
picture.
footer.
How much?
44.
44?
We tried nothing bigger. Just my wife and I. She weighed a snappy 125
Was
pounds.
it a Chris Craft? I mean, it's
No, it was a pacemaker. It was a
Okay.
It was a pretty good seaboat. So working as I did, I couldn't take it down to Florida.
Oh, yeah.
So we took it to a place called Romeoville where the barge is loaded, and along with 13 other boaters, put the thing into a barge with 6 feet of water, dirty and filthy, but there they were, and they slowly worked their way down to New Orleans, and we were so happy to get there with the dogs and everything. We were down there, and that started our life, and we lived on it for 7.5 years.
So that was a Florida life.
Yes, we brought it here. We brought it here to Siesta Key.
Oh, did you?
That's where we lived.
All right.
But we were on the road, and we were vagabonds. And my wonderful wife, she liked it too. And,
You never were a boater on the Great Lakes, were you, when you were up in Chicago?
30 years.
No.
30 years as a boater.
Oh, you were?
Oh, sure.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sure.
All right.
I was the chairman of the board of certain things, and we. Sure, Coast Guard Auxiliary and Power Squadron, the whole bit, and the Chicago Yacht Club and the Waukee Yacht Club, you know.
Charles, have we shown? There we go. Thank you very much. Charles is in there in the booth, anticipating my every thought. What I wanted to show was Bozo the Clown,
Well, that was a wonderful experience.
and that was, as I recall, a 15-year run for that show.
For me,
For you.
no, it just went off recently. In fact, I was called back to do the 25th anniversary of Bozo.
Okay. There must have been a few bozos in that time.
No,
No?
Bob Bell retired, and we got a young man. They tried very hard. They found a young man in the comedy club in L.A., and he turned out to be beautiful. But when we did this wild 25th anniversary thing, when he walked out in street clothes, they fell out of their chairs with Bob, and all he
Yeah.
had to do was do that laugh.
Yeah.
And
Well, you were the conductor. Here's Bozo, right smack dab in the middle. Wonderful shot. And just to his right and our left, screen left, with the conductor's outfit on, is Bob Trendler.
yeah,
And that you were associated with it from 1960 to 1975.
75, and it continued. And
You were the
it-
conductor. Did you write any original music for it?
Stacks is hard. You
Okay.
have to write cues, you know, and you bring the acts in. We got so that we knew the show so well that we didn't bother rehearsing. But when the act would come in, you know, you would have a dog act or something
Yeah.
that we would rehearse. And
Right.
all we did was talk numbers. Oh, number seven, so and so and so forth.
Yeah.
And we did it. And I couldn't dare gain any weight. You see, I had that tight coat on.
Oh yeah.
So you suffered with one
Yeah, but
meal a day.
that almost comes with the territory. We expect our conductors to be
Well,
big men,
Well,
and that's not unsightly.
they kind of like Mr. Bond. Wouldn't dare take the hat off with my bald head,
Yeah,
you know. And Bozo would never let anyone see with the cigarette or without the makeup, you know.
Well,
And one other thing I'd like to
Please,
say,
please.
the tickets were gone for 10 years in advance.
are you kidding?
No, 10 years in advance. They
For
used to
Bozo.
say if a girl became pregnant by the time her child was about 8 years old, the chances are she could see the show.
And would she also have a ticket for the 8-year-old, or would she have to
No,
wait another
you
few-
write in for your tickets, and
That's
it got
amazing.
so bad that 4 times a year we would go to Erie Crown Theater, the McCormick Place,
Okay.
the big place, or Medina Temple. Each has 5,000 seats, and in many times we'd have disabled children. And then Sears and the sandwich place, McDonald's, would give a prize to each child, you know.
That was on the early times of McDonald's then.
Oh yeah, he was one of our sponsors.
Ray Kroc.
He became a friend. He had a boat, just about 3 boats for me down at.
Of course,
Belmont
McDonald's was headquartered in the Chicago area,
Sure,
and still is,
yeah.
as a matter of fact. Was it
And
Northbrook
No,
or
he
someplace?
was a fun guy, and he liked to play the piano. He played terrible, but
Yeah.
during he would sit there, and when we'd have a station break, he would play.
Who's going to tell Ray Kroc he's not a good
I
piano
did.
player? Did you?
My biggest mistake I ever made. I should have gotten one of his.
That's kind of coincidental, Bob, because you're so closely associated with a clown show in Chicago, and Ray Kroc will always be associated with the McDonald's clown.
His wife is still alive.
Yeah, Joan, very, very philanthropical,
You betcha.
wonderful woman. But I'm thinking of Willard Scott as the first clown for McDonald's.
You bet.
So there's a kinship there, the whole family together. You know.
But
Go ahead.
the funniest thing was, at that time, I was the producer of the Chicago Symphony shows, and I would conduct that. I would conduct maybe 4 shows in a season, and the guys in the orchestra were always after me. They all wanted Bozo tickets.
Wow.
You know,
For their kids, of course.
Sure, for their kids. So I got great respect as a
You had the hottest ticket in town.
It's the funniest thing in there. Well, anyway, it was very funny.
Yeah. That's unbelievable. I've heard of hot tickets before, like the producers on
Can't
Broadway
be-
now.
can't
It's like
believe
2
it.
years out, but
Can't believe it.
8 years?
10 years.
10 years. But what, to go on every day or
5 days a week.
5 days a week?
5 days a week.
Wow.
And,
It must be like getting in to see the Oprah show today in Chicago,
oh, yeah,
which is kind of a tough one
yeah,
to get to.
yeah,
you know.
she does them in the old Wilding
Yeah,
Studios.
yeah.
She'll-
Listen, I don't want to get into
Okay.
name droppers anonymous here,
I
but
don't care.
you certainly have the right to, and we've tripped right along and talked about the Mike Douglases and the Red Skeltons and all the others, David Rose and the people you.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody we leave out that you want to say you worked with and really, really admired, whether they were singers, announcers, whatever.
Well, Jan Pierce,
Oh yes.
the brother-in-law of Richard Tucker,
Yeah.
used to do a lot of shows, and we would be sitting having coffee together, and he would say, you know, I used to play the fiddle. He said, I worked for Meyer Davis. I said, I worked for Meyer Davis too. And he said, you know, I think I'm the only guy in the Metropolitan who can swing.
Really?
He was very, very different. But I don't think we missed anybody, because it being the Chicago Tribune, they would come in and we'd get that gorgeous rotogravure picture made, which was always a work of art. And remember, we had the music festival, and that music festival went on in August for 100,000 people, and you always had guests. So we had Crosby and his sons one year.
Wow.
And at the same time, we had that Cash fella,
Johnny
Cash.
No kidding.
Well, the hillbilly people worked out in Soldiers Field, and we worked back at the end in the big 100-piece orchestra, you know. And one year we had Paul Whiteman,
Oh yes.
and and we had a rehearsal, and we also had Edie Gourmet on, and she was with child, you know, and she wanted to rehearse and get out of there.
That's a few years ago, because
Yeah.
they're on their farewell
I know
concert
they-
season now.
So anyway, that was a little problem. So the show begins, endless show. Went till midnight every time. And he's riding around in a car, and he comes in, he gets up on the stage, and it's trickling a little bit. And I had rented a 9-foot Steinway. I think it cost at that time $38,000. You know, rented
that
from
time?
Lider. Yeah. At that
What would it cost today?
Oh, 75,000.
Oh my God.
So anyway, I said, I'm ruined. I yell at the stagehand, put the blanket on this thing. You know? And White comes up, and his pianist comes up, and I say to the pianist, I said, looks like it's going to rain. He says, well, we'll slide around a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to be the conductor, being very dignified. I'm wiping off the keys with my handkerchief
Yeah.
and being real corny. But he got there, and the Lord was with us, and it all went off well.
Whiteman must have been quite a man, Paul Whiteman.
Well, For instance, we'd have things like this that I'd always have to fight with the Department of Parks about. We would have 400 accordion players, 400 there, and I said, "What's going to happen to those accordion players when the kids are watching the show? Somebody has to watch this thing, you know." And you would have elephants. It was a great, big, wonderful thing, and we lost it for only one reason. That the agents, you know from agents, decided they wouldn't give rain dates.
No guarantees.
No guarantees. So everybody was getting so much money, you know, but they just wouldn't allow that anymore. So, as I said, it was a parade. I remember Cecil B. DeMille used to come in about every 2 months, and they would present something. He would bring these stars in with him, and he would sit in the back and...
What are you, musicals type things?
Well,
or just
new
drama?
pictures.
Drama.
New pictures or drama, yeah. He had a thing on, and this was a preliminary thing.
Because his big thing, at least as far as radio audiences were concerned, was Lux Radio Theater.
Right. And they would come in and do things with us every couple of months, and he would bring 4 or 5 stars with him. You know? And I recall the lady that was married to Clark Gable, the one that was killed. I can't remember her name anymore.
I will in a second. I'm doing a little hang-up.
Anyway, she was on she was on a thing promoting something.
Yeah, she was on a military junket.
And
Carol Lombard.
Annette and I took her across the street to BG for coffee, and she looked so much like Annette. And she said, "You should do all my close-ups." She was kidding to Annette. Yeah. So we had a real nice talk. She got on the airplane, hit a mountain, died.
Yes.
Remember that?
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
But the whole thing was, it's the Chicago Tribune, and it's got to be better than anybody else.
Is that right?
Of course, now today it's not like that anymore. But
No.
They just did everything. The other stations, they did the NBC, but it wasn't just like us.
I don't know. Have you followed with any interest what is going on even as we sit here? And that is the shrinking of broadcast and publishing media. I'm speaking specifically of the FCC ruling this week. Remember how it was when you started? There were no conglomerates, no powerhouses.
Well, but maybe they can do it better. You know, Tribune has broken the rule for years.
Oh, really?
Now, for instance, they have an AM station and they got television in town. At one time, they also had an FM station that they gave away. The big one, the one that does all the classical things, the good one in Chicago, they gave that away because of a law.
I see.
And now, of course, they can do what they want. They'll
now
probably
it's
buy
anything goes.
Yeah, well,
Clear Channel, 1,200 radio stations in one company.
Well, look, I understand you got one station, one outfit in here owns 5 stations in this town.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Well, I don't know if that's good or not.
Well,
compete with each other.
The jury is still out. Of course, the chairman of the FCC claims it's not going to be quite as disastrous as the critics are afraid that it will be.
I don't know.
But, you know, radio and television in your time and mine was so individual.
Oh, yeah.
When you heard a personality or a voice on GN in Chicago, there was no question of where he was and what town he lived in.
You know it was Jack Brickhouse.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Today, you could hear a voice, and if a kid tells you it's 12 minutes after the hour and doesn't mention the hour, it's because he's being heard on a couple hundred stations across the country, and he doesn't dare mention an hour.
Well, you see, I'm speaking here with you. Remember that I'm a dinosaur. There are no people like myself. And there were very few of them that lasted as long as I did, and I lasted my whole life in there.
Yeah.
But when you figure the costs today, now they use an orchestra on Jay Leno's show at night. They don't play 7 notes.
Right.
You know, they're probably getting, I would say, about $500-600 a piece per night.
At least.
Just think of that today. So nobody has live music. You hear Regis Philbin saying, "Oh, it would be wonderful to have a house band."
Yeah.
For number one, what would they do? And that terrible expense. You probably have to pay each guy about $2,000 a week.
Oh yes.
And that's important money.
Yeah.
And
of course, the shows.
Our business is in dreadful shape. The music people.
Isn't it?
Oh,
Isn't
sure.
it really?
They're stealing and they're doing everything and they're doing not right.
Yeah, but see, here we're from another era, no question about it, and
Yeah.
we could be talking to a lot of people on looking at this program right now, who weren't brought up to that standard, and don't honestly have any comparison, and nor any particular concern about what's going on in the business today.
And yet I find people who really, really would like to enjoy classical music.
Yeah.
Or good show music or so. I bumped into someone the other day, said, you know, I've got an organ in my house. I said, well, that's real great. She says, I only play on the white notes.
Oh, really? Only play on the white note.
That's it.
Yeah.
So there's an awful lot of mediocrity around here.
Now, when you retired in 1975, or did the business retire from you?
No, I retired. I wanted to retire, and Ward Call said, look, we have nothing going here but the Bozo show. He said, you can stay on it forever if you want, but I'd rather you became a producer.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I don't want to do that. I'm
So
doing it so long, and I keep looking at my wife and said, can we afford to retire? She said, okay.
Oh, really?
Sure. So we sold everything up there and
Headed here,
lived on a boat.
down here.
Yes.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, here I am hosting a program,
Yeah.
a television program, and hope to continue to for some time. And I'm writing and I'm doing everything.
You're a busy guy. I
I'm
know.
a busy guy.
Yes, you are.
I officially retired in 1989,
Well, it's
which
not too
was
long
amazingly
ago. Oh.
good for a man like myself who didn't plan ahead too darn well, but we just kind of fell into a good situation. But anyway, what have you done? I mean, was it all the boat? But what did you do? Could you completely divorce yourself from the business?
I did. In fact, I had a little instrument on the boat. It was a dreadful little thing, like a little celesta. I had done it so long, and I had written enough music to wallpaper Evanston, Illinois. Okay? So enough is enough. And just now, within the last 3 days, I've been practicing.
Really?
And things that I played when I was 11 years old, I'm grunting through. But I'm doing it. I'm playing Haydn. I used to hate it, but I say it's real nice.
Oh,
and I
great.
play just for me.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
and of course, well, I don't want to go into that.
Well, it's not important. We didn't even discuss Robert Trendler's age, but
Tell them.
you have passed 90
I'm
and
91 years old.
91 years old.
95,
91
11,
years old,
12.
and,
Yes.
and rolling. And I think we're rolling here too. How are we doing on time, ladies and gentlemen? What are we going to do? We're going to sing a medley of Bob's hits? Huh?
We don't need that. We
All right.
don't need that.
Now, we're looking again. This was the music show. See the picture up on the screen? We're looking at the big guy.
Yes, those were paid for by by New York, and I think King Features might have had something to do with that.
King
also.
Features,
Yeah.
even in that time.
Yeah,
I didn't even realize that. Well, that was a comic book
I had a
empire.
strange thing happen. I was doing one year a more serious program, and I had my favorite soprano in the world with me and my favorite baritone.
Were they names we would recognize?
Well, Nancy Carr, I don't know if you know
No.
her, and Bruce Foote. He was just absolutely wonderful.
Mhm.
And this particular day, we were going to do, one of the things was going to be Song of India. Now, there are two. And we're rehearsing one. I said, Nancy, come on. We used to drive her crazy because she was so wonderful, and I always told everybody she was a troublemaker. But she wasn't. She was a darling. And I start to go into the number, and she looks at me like she says, that's not the song I learned.
That's not the song.
Yeah, she learned the other one. So
I didn't know
anyway,
there were two songs of India.
So anyway, she said, I'll write the lyrics in a basket.
Oh, I see. I got you.
So anyway, she did. We went to the thing. Now she's singing the thing. So after it's all over, I get a call from New York. He says, what was she doing here? What's she looking for in that basket?
Oh, boy.
I had to fire her.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's like writing crib notes on your cuff, for an
yes.
exam or something like that.
So many outrageous things happen, and you just can't think of anything because you sort of go dry. because it just went on for so many years,
Yeah.
and it was good, and it was good. There were little problems, musician problems, and during the war, I wasn't taken. I did propaganda, and did shows at Great Lakes,
Oh, really?
and
What was the nature of the shows? I mean,
wonderful shows.
patriotic type
Oh
thing.
yeah, and also we made recordings on the big things.
The big
you know.
acetates
Oh yeah,
again.
they were.
Armed Forces Radio
Oh
and all
yeah,
that kind of stuff.
we worked very hard in Fort Sheridan and so forth, and I lost a lot of my men.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
one thing the Tribune did, as the man went to service, his family was paid half his salary all the time he was gone.
No
Isn't that
kidding.
nice?
Oh, yeah.
And then they came back to their job.
In this recent Iraqi situation, I think a lot of the young men that were called up from reserves didn't even get that kind of
Well,
compensation.
well,
I know there
these
was
guys-
something there, but I don't think they got quite
Yeah.
anything that generous.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was always the stipulation that when a man, or woman, I guess, came back from the service during World War II, I believe legally an employer was duty-bound to take them back in.
Well, my guys just sat down again.
Yeah.
Sure.
Mhm.
A couple of them didn't want to stay long. They went to California, which was all right. But for the most part, in a year or so, we were back to strength.
Now, you were composer, conductor,
Yeah.
arranger, the whole Megillah, and you were in Chicago, which was certainly a hotbed of
Yeah.
broadcasting in its early years and still is. To what extent were you exposed to the big bands coming through Chicago? Because they certainly did.
They were all friends for this reason. My office was in the MCA building. They were up on the top floor, and they knew I was a studio guy. And they knew my musicians knew them. The trumpet players always went to one trumpet player that I had because he made trumpets for a lot of people in the world. So it was all a very, very close thing, and you got to know all the guys. I recall when Harry James' band was at the Sherman, I went down with a music publisher, Annette and I, and he came over at the interval and said, what do you think of my boy singer? I said,
Some kid
"Man,
named Sinatra?
No, I said, he's awful thin. I said, he's got a funny
Awful
complexion.
thin, yeah. You'll never
And I
amount to
said, the
anything.
best, he said, I said, the best boy singer I ever heard in my life. I said, without a doubt. And he said, yeah, I think so too. And shortly after that, Tommy Dorsey bought the contract.
Yeah,
and then
took him
he
away
went.
from
But-
Harry.
But we knew all of them.
Did you?
And on occasion, the ones that played, like the Dorsey, would come in and do an afternoon show with me. And Jimmy would come in and Tommy. So I don't think there were anybody except territory bands. Now Lawrence Welk became a very, very close friend. They were at the Aragon and Trianon, two ballrooms, so long that they all rented houses.
Oh, yeah, he was a Midwesterner.
Yeah,
big
he
time.
was.
Big time.
And he used to come in on Mondays because you remember remote broadcasts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from the hall, I mean, from the ballroom or whatever. We took mics down there. The engineers did. Well, all that music had to be cleared.
Oh, of course.
So at the beginning of the week, Lawrenceville could be first because there was a law that if there was a hit tune, it could be played, but it couldn't be played for 2 hours later, until 2 hours later.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, it was a real serious. So he'd come in with all his tunes, and he would have coffee, and then we would talk. And through the years, when he became very popular, when they come into Chicago, he always stopped into Bozo.
The reason I asked you about the bands passing through Chicago, which they absolutely, certainly did,
Well,
big time,
Yeah.
but we have a few pretty good musicians retired and living in this area. I'm trying to think of the saxophone player who just passed away.
Yes, he was first class.
You remember the name?
No.
I know, but I've even talked to the man on the
Yeah.
phone. He was a member of Broadcast Pioneers. He
Oh, yeah, little
can-
fella. Clarinet
Yes, little
player.
guy.
Yeah.
But you know who else
Worked at
is
NBC.
who else is here, and who knows? Someday she may sit here and we'll do a biography of hers. And she goes back to the days when, as a teenager, she sang with Sinatra, and I saw a picture of her because she did a show locally here just a few years ago. Connie Haynes with the Pied
Remember her-
Pipers.
Remember her well.
Sang with Dorsey,
Sure.
sang with Sinatra.
Sure.
Lives in, I don't know if Sarasota, but certainly in the Sarasota,
Area.
Venice
Great.
area.
Yes.
Unfortunately, had a serious auto accident a year or two
She
ago.
did?
Yeah, and the last I heard, she goes to rehab a lot. But up until just a few years ago, now mind you, There's a few years on this lady,
I know.
and she was still going out and singing.
Well, that's wonderful.
And unlike a few famous singers we couldn't mention who sang too long, she
It's supposed to
sang
be
with a
quiet.
young group, you know,
Yeah.
piano, bass,
Yeah.
guitar,
Yeah.
at the Venice Little Theater, just down the road from here.
Okay.
And I went very skeptical, like, with that attitude, maybe you shouldn't be there.
No, she hammered them out pretty good.
She had every right in the
Yes,
world to be
yes,
on that
sure.
stage.
You could
She might not hit some of the notes she hit
Well,
with Dorsey,
yeah.
but she was still good.
drop them down.
And I just wondered if you had ever met Connie Haynes.
Yes.
Probably bumped into her now and then.
We did, we had to do an awful lot of benefits for the Tribune, and I recall doing something at the Opera House, and Wayne King's band was in one room, and there was another band, Dorsey's or somebody in
Right.
another room,
Yeah, you talked about the Lombardos before, too, so you
They
must
were
have met
very, very, very close friends. Carmen gave me a pair of chows. And it was very fine. And years later, when we were doing a television show called The Big Bands. Now all the big bands that were alive, we got on that show. It ran for several years.
Yeah.
And they would come in the office for clearance. As contractor, I had to know that they had a union card and so on. And I said to him, I said, "Why are you still working?" He says, "I have to work."
Have to?
Yeah, he said, I put on all those shows in Long Island. They were terribly expensive. And he said, running race boats is expensive.
Oh.
But he said, Carmen's got all the money.
Yeah, Guy Lombardo was a great racer.
Oh, yes. They were.
High-speed racing fan. Yeah.
So one very, very strange thing, if we've got time.
You got
we
time.
all right?
No one's waving me off yet.
All right. Most of these bands didn't have bands anymore.
Yes, right.
So they would have their book. Now, the people may not know what a book is. That means their music. They would have one in Los Angeles.
Their arrangements.
And they would have one in Chicago and have another book in New York.
And they get the musicians when they get there.
Well, my bass player handled 3, 4, and my trumpet band handled 3 more of these things. And they would act as contractors and get the musicians. So I recall one time Bob Crosby was going to do a date in Cincinnati. And he said to me, "Well, that's your hometown." I said, "Yes, I have to go and visit my father anyway." So I went down and I played piano for Bob Crosby. Got him a little band. But on the television show, I recall talking to, remember Sammy Kaye?
Of course.
And I talked to him, and he said, "No, I'm working with 6 men." And I said, "But you're booked for 13 guys." He said, "Well, can you get me somebody?" And I said, "Yes."
Yeah.
So now, this happened a few times, and it was a little beraggle-shabble with the clothes. So we ordered 15 white ones, blue ones, and red ones from a guy. That's another story I won't go into. So anyway, they would come in, and there you'd see my guys. And some of them, the whole band would be my guys. It would be very funny because I've got the tapes of them.
Yeah.
And they played everything. They were so wonderful. And then the whole band, for instance, Duke Ellington, who was the only man I ever kissed. Oh, he was my great love. They would come in, and they really looked pretty tired off the road, down below at the loading dock. They would come. Yeah. But some, Stan Kenton would come in with a full band. And very, very, very expensive.
Well, I think we've made a point here today, Robert, as time runs out and the clock runs.
Yeah.
Number one, you've had one incredible career.
Well.
And it only goes back, 80 years?
Oh,
That's all.
out.
That's all. Only 80 years, Bob. I mean, really, And Chicago was pretty darn good.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And that's about all the time we're going to have for this one.
All right.
But I hope we touched all the bases. I got a feeling we haven't even gone halfway as far as we might have. But
No.
It's just time for me to look into that camera.
Some of the things we'd have to do in our living room.
Okay, edit out later on. Huh? Okay. Our guest has been Bob Trendler, only an 80-year veteran, that's all, a broadcast pioneer. I'm Don Blair. Thanks for tuning in.